Welcome back to Talk Jamaica, streaming live on Talk Jamaica Radio and also at Carib Rhythms Radio. My name is Ricardo
Listeners,
Brooks.
listeners, my name is Ralston Chamberlain. The bedrock of representative democracy is the ability of voters to hold elected officials accountable. Polls can play an important role in democratic accountability by identifying the greatest concerns of voters that candidates should address and the policies that voters most want candidates to support. Polling can also contribute to democratic responsiveness between elections by helping incumbents to anticipate what voters expect.
But with everything else, there are some concerns. How accurate are they? Do they really influence the voting public? Or does it simply distract them? Are candidates and government officials poll-hooked addicts who slavishly follow the preferences or whims of the public? And does the press serve as a watchdog that ferrets out flawed polls and facilitates strong responsiveness to the public's concern? Or does it do something quite different? Here to weigh in on the discussion, we have Paul Bourne, research consultant specializing in politics and public health, and Mark Wignal, blogger and columnist for the Jamaica Gleaner. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, dear listeners.
Mark Wignal, I'd like to start with you. Polling. Now, we're seeing two separate groups of polls, one commissioned by the Gleaner, the other by RGR, showing slightly different things, yes? And the Jamaican people looking on, what should they take from these polls? Should they put too much store on it or just go ahead based on what they believe the issues to be?
Well, one thing is certain, polling is here to stay. Whether some may consider it important and some may consider it highly unimportant. And of course, any political party which scores behind in the polls will always tell you, oh, we don't follow polls. And the party which is usually ahead will say, well, we are going ahead on the ground with our organization. We were guided by the polls, but it is our organization that will take us there. Mm-hmm. The late Marty Perkins, he always had this idea that polls were a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
In other words, if the poll said 25 to 21, you would probably get the same thing. But what the poll does, it gives you a guide as to what is likely to happen. And the closer you get to an election, it is, well, theoretically, it is easier for you. Well, it is never usually easy to get it right, but it becomes easier for you to more accurately measure what voters are likely to come up with, because you can actually measure the spot strength and then estimate what is likely to be a surge on election day. In other words, if you're, say, 2 weeks out from election and a poll is done, you can, from experience, say, well, it is likely that both political parties would have a surge of, say, 2 or 3 percentage points. So sometimes you can get it right, sometimes you can get it close to right. But generally, polls create excitement in any polity, and it allows those, especially who are on the fence, to somehow congeal and make a decision at the last minute.
Paul Bourne, let me ask you, do you think polls serve any function in whipping up the base? Because can a base become, dejected if they realize that their party is not doing so well? Or, on the flip side, become energized because they see an uptick for their party?
Well, clearly not. And let's start by saying that. We need to understand clearly that polling or survey comes from a scientific base. And we need to understand clearly that while a poll speaks to a time period and doesn't necessarily mean a predictability as to what outcomes are likely to be, it must be understood within the context that it gives you information now or when it was actually done. Now, anybody viewing the poll will take a different position as to how they see the poll is going to go or what they're likely to think the poll polls indicate. Now we need to understand clearly that if you're on the losing end of a poll, that could mean something for you in terms of actually mobilizing your base.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when Perkins actually speaks that poll is a fulfilling prophecy, the argument is not really true. Because a poll cannot predict an outcome. All it is doing is giving you information on person's perception on the day it was done. Now, if persons want to vote like the poll indicates, that in itself is another indication of how people are going to think again. Now, so the argument goes, a poll will always be used by the opposition or by the persons on the losing end, and it could also be a deception for those who are on the winning end to think that they are okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Ralston?
All right, let me ask you this, Mark, because one of the things that you often hear the parties saying is that, and I hear this mostly from the PNP, is that their internal polls show something absolutely different from what a national poll would show. Is that just to put on a face, or to say that they're not buying into the national poll?
Well, I know that both political parties they use probably the same pollster or set of pollsters who do polls for newspapers or radio stations, television stations, what have you. So they may be doing say constituency polls in marginal seats to get an idea as to exactly how they stay. At the same time, they are doing their own canvasses, and sometimes canvasses can be pretty off, from the actual. But basically, coming up to an election, both political parties, they will try to find the money to fund polls because they want to be guided by something they call empirical evidence. And the nearest empirical evidence they can come up with are data from pollsters. But there is another aspect of it. Polls, especially positive polls, can be placed before potential funders. And, you can say to the funders, listen, we are ahead by 2 or 3 points. It is likely that we are going to win the elections. So we are the particular party that you must spend your money on. In other words, this is not going to be a lost dollar. So you can fund us and let us take it all the way first past the post. So that is another very important aspect of it. Now, in a dead heat situation, that argument becomes a little bit more difficult because you now have to convince the funders that whenever my leader goes up on the podium and whips up the base or whips up the party workers, and then that energy is taken to the communities, it is taken further afield, and then it affects the broader electorate, we will take it home. So, there are many aspects of it, but a very important aspect is taking it before potential funders.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Mark, because I want to point to you a part of the Don Anderson poll where reasons persons vote for their party. And what we see in that is a 29% indicating that they always support the JLP and a 52% indicating that they always support the PNP. Would that then put the PNP in a better standing to approach their funders?
Yes, and let me go a little bit further, because I've been looking at some of Anderson's numbers, some of his polls done privately, and I have been given copies of them over the last year or so. And what is being indicated is that when you examine the 2011 voter, about 94%, or put it this way, voters who voted PNP in the last elections, 95% of those PNP voters are indicating that they are likely to vote for the PNP again, as against only 78% of JLP voters indicating that they are likely to vote for the JLP again. In other words, the longer a political party holds on to power, or the easier it becomes for a political party to snatch that power after it has lost power, is the more the voter for that political party somehow becomes more charged up and will, in fact, go ahead and support his party in the next elections. So that is a problem for the JLP right now.
Paul Bourne, let me take you to the substantive issues coming out of this poll. The polls. Bill Johnson finds that Mrs. Simpson Miller, her popularity has plunged, and he says that the majority of Jamaicans who are polled say that they do not wish to see her returning as the Prime Minister. Now, we know, of course, that the country has been in for a rough time over the last 4 years, but are you surprised at these findings?
No, I'm not. And what I'm concerned with, though, I want to take the discussion beyond that. What I'm concerned with is to sort of understand how people view politics and what they're likely to do when election comes around. Now, historically, Jamaica, in terms of its political landscape, favors the PNP. Part of the reason because of Michael Manley and what he has done. So a number of persons support the PNP within that context. So what is likely to occur at any time when there's going to be an election is that person may or may not support the leader, as in the case of, it has happened before, where in the case of P.J. Patterson, and he won again and again and again. So what I'm trying to let you be aware of is when it comes down to a political race, just like a Bolt and a Safa, people are likely to actually vote for one or tell their preference and actually participate. Now, do not watch what the poll is saying in terms of the Simpson Miller not having a favorite popularity, or that her popularity has actually plunged. Because people will go out and vote just as how they normally have been historically.
Yeah. And Mark Wignal... Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, I agree. I agreed with what was said there a while ago, because even though electorates change, it takes a long time for an electorate to really change. It only happens in incremental bits and pieces. So the traditional voting pattern is very, very, very strong. And it doesn't take much to whip up that traditional base, especially in a situation where you may be having a lower than usual turnout. So even although one poll is indicating that you may have a 60% turnout, I think you are likely to have a lower turnout than that. And in the lower turnout, there is a smaller base to work with. So the party that has the organization, that has a leader, that has some sort of magic, that magic that you can't quite say what it is. But that magic that can appeal from the podium, that can whip up the base, and that can go beyond policy. Because I'll be honest with you, the more I examine a lot of those in the electorate, is the more I'm convinced that policy is not necessarily what gets them all. And I'm talking about the raw base here now, who will go out just for the traditional carnival of voting, rather than whether they have a job or whether they can pay the school fee, or hard issues like that. Because a lot of voting on election day is about carnival. And any political party that has that ability to find the funds to go out there and turn that carnival into a happy time, that is the party. And it sounds bad for me to be saying it, but unfortunately, that is the reality many, many times.
I think the matter goes deeper than carnival in terms of identity. No, the persons associate themselves with a political party, and that association goes to the core of their psychology in terms of letting you understand who they are.
Definitely.
So because persons see themselves as PNP, and that is their identity, they will always vote within that context. It is deeper than just the carnival atmosphere.
No, I agree with that.
But I want to go further, Mark, by saying that if the election comes out in a situation where less persons vote than the 65% that is actually forwarded, the PNP will win the election. It has happened historically before in terms of whatever it falls below 40% or just a little above 40%, the People's National Party has actually been the victor. Now, we need to understand clearly that Jamaicans, by definition, are not so much in favor pro JLP. So the PNP can do little or nothing to win the election. Or put it another way, the PNP has to lose the election for the JLP to win the election. It goes that far.
But let me take you up on that point that you have made, Paul, that the Jamaican people by nature do not favor the JLP. What do you think, yes, could be reason, the rationale? Could it be leadership? Could it be that they have not sold the policies of the JLP to the people strong enough?
Oh no, it goes deeper than that. I like that where you're going. If we look at what happened, what occurred in the 1970s in terms of what Michael Manley did, in terms of his social programs for females and all of that stuff, sending a number of persons to university and all of that money that was spent in that area, all of that is what the People's National Party is reaping today. It's reaping in terms of through the media, it's reaping in terms of people's love for the People's National Party, and although we are saying that young persons are likely to vote, the reality is they are not going to vote. And because they're not going to vote, it comes back down to the base again. The base is going to vote as all the base has always been voting. And I would just like to add to that. The very fact that the PNP held power straight for 18 and a half years, it gave it the time to expropriate just about all organizations and civic bodies in this country. Absolutely. Every significant group of people in this country became PNPized during that time. And the same thing would have happened had the JLP had it for 18 and a half years. Yeah.
But it was the PNP who had it for 18 and a half years. And any political party who has power for 18 and a half years and didn't infiltrate every single aspect of our lives would have had to be a very idiotic party.
Mm-hmm. Are you surprised, gentlemen, that considering all we're seeing in the country, that the JLP is not faring better in these polls?
I believe that the leadership of the JLP, again, the leader has to have a certain magic. You can have the best ideas, but if you can't sell those ideas by this magic from the podium, if you don't have that ability, I mean, we're not going to say that every leader has that magic like a Michael Manley, because Michael Manley was like the complete man. He had intellect and he had this wizardry from the podium. And Andrew Holness, he may be able to articulate some views, but somehow he doesn't have that magic from the podium. And
but how do we reconcile that with the fact that he is still, relatively popular as opposed to Simpson Miller, who does have that magic?
I think he also needs the organization. He needs that organization plus a little bit of magic, more than Simpson Miller needs the organization. But you must understand, that when it comes down to organization, the PNP has always been able to get it in the last few weeks before an election.
Right.
And again, I am saying that 18 and a half year run made it much easier for them. And inside this discussion must include the media. The PNP has infiltrated the media so much that the media technically says the PNP whenever it's election time and before election time. So the PNP has that natural advantage of having spent the 18 years, as Mark actually mentioned before,
in government. And they are operated in every facet, even the church.
Mm-hmm.
So most Jamaicans are rise. And because your PNP rise, it's so difficult for the JLP to do anything and be considered to be substantial.
How then, gentlemen, to be a viable political party, would you advise the JLP to turn those fortunes around? Because if I hear you saying that, PNP is so deeply ingrained in our DNA as a country, then it must mean that the JLP will forever be fighting an uphill battle.
But we can go further than that. Not only will they face a battle, if the JLP does not recognize that they need to actually start some serious, not only campaigning, but re-socializing Jamaicans to see them as a viable option, it will be in opposition.
Well, the Prime Minister has been missing in action for a very long time. But she has a constant look on her side. In other words, whenever she shows up, she's able to actually make the people believe that she was never missing in action before. Mm-hmm. So over the next few weeks, when she hits the various communities and she starts to speak and she starts to whip up her raw base, and then it is taken further afield, I just believe that the JLP is going to be put under a little bit more than normal pressure.
Well, you know what? Why the JLP is also having a problem, listeners and Mark? The woman factor from the PNP. If the JLP is to actually do some stuff, it can be considered to be opposing her femininity. And so because of that, the JLP is actually walking cautiously. As if you were a man, if you were a Peter or a Bunt, so it would have been a different campaign. And then when you take into consideration exactly who Mrs. Simpson Miller is, as you rightfully mentioned, not only is she lucky, but for some unknown reason, she has that love that if she begins to speak again, everything falls in place.
Mm-hmm. That is so correct.
And she doesn't have that. So the JLP needs to recognize. Correct. So the JLP needs to recognize exactly what that is and how they're going to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, I want to come to that aspect, because in the last general election, part of the complaint was that the campaign launched by the G2K at the time, which seemed to undermine and belittle Portia Simpson Miller at the time, contributed to them losing that election. So is it now that the JLP is at a disadvantage where they now have to toe the line in terms of some of the things that they would like to put out about the Prime Minister?
No, but the JLP is going about it the wrong way. Because let's look at it. A number of the things that the G2K did, any sensible political or astute political individual would have said to that. Because in terms of what happened, and clearly the issue relating to that part of things. Now, the JLP has been spending too much time actually trailing Mrs. Simpson. They need to come out now with something new, something different, and begin to woo people. Remember, we all have a tendency to go back to our bed and to our roots. So if it is that people are going to take persons away from that, we have to give them something new and something different. The JLP has been doing over the last 4 or 5 years, and even long before that, is waiting for some miracle to happen, waiting for God to come from the sky and do things. It is not going to happen, and clearly they have not recognized this. Now, if they had recognized it, they would have started putting in place some serious things that would actually go a far way to doing some stuff. Look at exactly what Andrew said. The same argument about bitter medicine. Would it have been any different if Andrew actually kept his mouth shut, do what he had to do, put forward a policy in terms of what he intend to do, than to speak about a bitter medicine? The answer is yes. No, he did not see that, and neither any of the persons in his party saw it fit to say to him, so no, sir, do not go there. Because if you go there and persons think of bitter medicine, they might withdraw. And if they withdraw, what is going to likely to happen? You lose the election. Thought. The JLP just not thinking.
Mm-hmm. And with all we're seeing, Paul Bourne, first starting with you and then to Mark, do you expect the general election to still be held this year?
I have some feeling that it is highly likely to happen. And why I say I have that hunch, and it's because of a number of things that I'm actually seeing. I'm seeing Paul Bourne coming out and making some statements. I'm seeing Mr. Similar giving some indication as to what is happening. The media appears to be know something that's going on. That in itself, plus there is some aura that it is likely to happen in the wider public. So I'm saying I would give the election sometime this year. I'd say about 50%. If it doesn't happen, then I would not be surprised.
Okay, Mark?
Based on what has been coming from Dr. Peter Phillips, and I'm assuming that all of the words some of the words in his mouth are coming to him through the leader, through our Prime Minister, that we're going to have a date, and it's going to be a very nice date. You can't promise me a date and then don't show up, because I'm going to be very annoyed. So I think if I were to advise the ruling party, I would tell them maybe February of next year. But I'm assuming that they are armed with poll numbers that is showing them where the trend is and where it is likely to peak, and more importantly, where it is likely to start to dip. So if it is likely that sometime early next year it is likely to dip, then they may consider it useful to have it this year and get it over with.
But Mark, if you look at world indicators in the market, it will say to you that the world economy is likely to actually contract next year. That is not going to actually be anything good for the People's National Party. It would make more prudent sense for them to keep the election this year than to go for it next year.
And one very important block, the civil service. You have just given them a 3 or 4% increase, and then you're going to take back that from them in pension contribution. That is very, very, very. Let's issue. Let's include the other one that the PNP has been stalling for a while. The laying off of about 30,000 civil servants. The PNP has been stalling that one for a long time. And if that were to be included in the mix sometime next year, early next year, the PNP will have to actually forego the argument about the election. Well, in line with that, I really wonder why the Jamaica Labour Party would want power now. Because if it actually gets power, it is going to have to do a lot of the unpleasant things that the PNP may have to do should the PNP win. And the PNP looks like it to win. Also include that if it were to get power with what it has to do, it will possibly lose the election shortly after. I believe we're going to see after this one one-term administrations. I'm thinking of that, but I'm not necessarily sure that I want to actually forward the idea totally. But I'm thinking that might be a case. Yes, I'm with you, dear, because it's going to be very, very difficult to hold on to power. Very difficult. Oh boy.
All right, Paul Bourne, Mark Wignal, I want to thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us and sharing your always valuable insights and perspective with our listeners. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.